Maybe. Oh.
Okay, just before I start, I want
there.
you to know that as I was going through more than 8,000 images to put this together, I realized that you almost wouldn't even know I'd been out of the country, because the types of images that I take are the types of images that I take. And it doesn't really matter where I am. You'll recognize my style, I'm sure, in these images. So here we go. And there's no music, no narration, just the titles and the images.
I think Anne was going to introduce you, but
It's too late now.
Maybe she doesn't need introducing.
we know who you are.
I don't think we have any new members, so.
Oh, I gotta move this.
Gumdrop trees.
Oh, nice.
Beautiful.
Gnarly.
Wow.
Mirrors on the ceiling. Wow.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
Cool.
what am I selling? Oh.
Wow, that's weird.
Ooh,
That's Tricia.
that's
Creepy.
Yeah.
Sorry if this offends anyone.
Oh, goodness.
Ah,
Didn't even notice.
Where was that?
What is it saying?
I'll tell you. What happened?
you went backwards. There we go.
Mm. It's a portfolio for you here.
Oh. Wow.
Athena Nike. Difficult to translate.
Nice.
I'll be sorry.
Abstract
Very
show
nice.
coming up.
Flip.
Great. I love it.
Mm.
Oh,
Oh,
Ah, there you go. Huh.
Huh. Oh, wow.
Wow, I love this.
Hmm.
Mm,
That's
Very
it.
nice.
Yay!
Great job.
Fun.
Thank you so much, Tricia. That was really interesting.
Great.
Like a wonderful
You're
trip.
welcome. Thanks for asking.
I like how you
Thank you.
juxtapose the, the historical and the
Yeah.
wild shots. It's great.
So anybody, if you want to do a member moment, let me know and we'll put you on the calendar. Next month, it's going to be Tim Allen.
Yay.
Right. Yep, yep. Is he the last one we have then? So far?
Well, other people have expressed interest. So
Do you guys want me to tell you what that thing said?
Oh, yes.
Oh,
Yes.
yeah. Please.
Okay, hang on. I gotta get out of this. Let's see. Okay. The thing at the top with the flamingo said, "Wow, those are ugly pigeons." Below it, it says, "No, it is not." And then the one at the top guy says, "I have been doing this for years." And then sort of the overall theme is, "Our thoughts go out to all those unknown men who never make the news."
That's interesting.
And it was along this really big wall. It's huge. It's like probably 12 to 14 feet long. And there were two of them. Amazing.
I do want to say two things. One is that the Netherlands has a long history of comics like that. In the museum, there were cartoons from the 1600s, 1700s of the Dutch making fun of the French and the French king. So political cartoons, and they were just as rude and just as revealing. So it's really kind of interesting that they keep it up over the centuries.
I didn't include the picture of the sex shop.
Oh, that's good.
yay, Tricia, thank you.
That was wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Now, I get to introduce our speaker. Right? Yeah, okay. Well, it's my pleasure to introduce Carol Polich. She's a professional photographer from Bozeman, Montana, and I met her when I bought my very first digital camera, the T1i. I think she felt sorry for me, and I took her classes and workshops, and we became friends, and I'm really glad that she could come and present for us. And I'm hoping that some of your students will come too. And
Well-
Carol, take it away.
Okay, thank you. That was great, Tricia, seeing your adventures in the different countries and how you composed
Thank you.
so many of your scenes. That was it's nice to see what your club is doing with you know, the member moment, which is really a nice touch, I think. The thank you for inviting me, Linda. And thank you to the program committee for having me do this presentation. So I'm going to cover quite a bit tonight, and on the artistry of shutter speed, thinking outside the box. And I'm opening up with this particular shot. It doesn't have much to do with, I'm trying to pin myself here. Doesn't have much to do with shutter speed, but look at the words at the top: research and chasing the light. I think research is so important, whether you're going an hour and a half down to Yellowstone Park, which is where I live, to overseas, to see what the weather is, the climate, how to dress, what do you want to take. As many times I've been to Asia, I've left my big 500 lens at home because I know I'm not going to come across too many animals, and I'm more interested in doing culture or architecture at that point. So research is important. Chasing the light in this particular picture, two of us went to Greece in 2020. We were a little cut short because of COVID. And we checked into the hotel, went up in our little rental up the hill, and we knew that the monasteries were there, except it'd been cloudy all day, so no great shakes on the photos, but it was part of research until the clouds cracked and the sun came through. And that's important when you're doing sunsets. Look for that crack in the sky, because you'll get these sorts of God rays or sun flares. So research and chasing the light. Chasing the light, I jumped out of the car, grabbed the tripod, had my Sigma 24-105 on my full frame camera. We were near a viewpoint. It was just a flat rock, no bushes, and I started shooting. Plus I used my graduated neutral density filter to help even the light or the bright against the dark. That was important. And then it was all over within 10 minutes, and you're just sort of gasping like, wow, hope that happens every day for the next, I think we were there for 2 more days. So that's my intro. You can see that I really don't want to have 2,000 photos to look through and fill my card. So I'm still on the old DSLRs, not that old, but 3 to about 7 years old. With the DSLRs, I haven't jumped into the mirrorless at this point. You can see what I'm using for my cameras, my lenses, the Sigma 24-105, I've already mentioned that. And I was on the loaner list for with Sigma back in the 1990s. And they gave me anything and everything that I asked for. They even sent me off with their 500 lens one of my times in Africa. So I've stuck with Sigma. I haven't used Canon or any of the other lenses. The Laowa Venus 12mm, when it was first marketed, which is about 6 years ago, it was had the least distortion of the super wide. So I invested in it. It is manual focus, so it's a challenge. And my main reason for it was architecture, which I'm interested in the contemporary as well as ancient ruins. Of course, the wide angle scenes. The newest addition is the little 56mm lens baby velvet, which I'll speak a little bit more of about in a few minutes here. So my travels started way back, but my first time to Africa, and I'm beginning with Africa because I was definitely impassioned with the wildlife and the sounds at night. And as you can see upper right, there's my little tent, and this is a Toyota Yaris. Usually I'm in a hatchback. So I'm traveling solo by myself where I can just sit and focus, concentrate, as well as write. And my tent is tied off because when the winds come up in the Namib Desert, and to the left is the Namibian, or the Namib sand dunes, when the winds come up, they're so fierce they can peel the paint right off your car. And previous to that, a few years previous, I was there with a South African friend, and she went back to camp to check on our tents because the wind was howling. And sure enough, my tent was escaping, cartwheeling over the dunes while she was running after it. Got it and secured it back at camp. The upper left is myself. It's a self-timer. I often did self-timers because I was working as a freelancer with travel and clothing catalogs. And I needed to put myself into sort of an adventurous type of mode, I guess you might say, including what color clothes am I going to wear depending on the environment I'm in. Is it a mountain scenery? In this case, a desert scene. This is the Dead Flay in the Namib dunes, which I'd been to several times. This was shot in 2010. Now, self-timers are difficult, more difficult than I would say you're looking through the viewfinder. You have to envision how do you want to set up when particularly you're not necessarily facing the camera. So what is it I'm looking at? Where am I focusing? So I'm focusing on the dead tree, and how much depth of field do I want? Whatever I'm viewing, in this case, the other dead trees in the Dead Flay, is going to, how much do I want sharp? So therefore, as you can see, I'm at 1/25 of a second f/18, which is rather extreme. And once you get your shutter speed, you need to lock it in. You lock it in with your AEL button. That's the auto exposure lock. On a lot of the newer cameras, that function isn't there. It's up by your thumb though. When you lock that in, when you're in aperture priority, then you race to your position here, and hopefully it's not too far away. I usually give myself 10 seconds, or if I'm on a remote control, that helps. So if you're not in aperture, but you're in manual, it will lock in. When you move away from the camera, what you have to remember is the light comes in and it's going to change your shutter speed. Lower right is in Vietnam. I started going there in 2016. I had friends who were teaching, or they were working in Hanoi, and they said, why don't you come over and use our home as a base camp? Vietnam was not on my bucket list, but there was a moment when I thought, well, let's just Google it and research and see what the scenery's like. And it was just fantastic, northern Vietnam. During those 3 times I was there, I met their tour operator, a young woman who kept saying, Carol, you've got to go way in the far north, right up to the China border. Well, how am I going to do that? Well, you take a 6-hour bus ride, and from there, I'll connect you with a guide and you go by motorbike. Okay, so my duffel bag only had minimum enclosed. My backpack had my camera, couple cameras, some lenses, and off I went. What she failed to tell me was that no one speaks English, including my guide. So that came through cell translation, which was humorous in itself. So Sang actually took one of my cameras and took a picture of me. And he got quite fascinated with what I was doing. And whenever I have like a driver, when I went back to Cambodia 3 or 4 times, I had the same person drive because he understood that I was looking for the light. I didn't want to go where all the tourists were going into the temples. And so I would always show them what it is I'm trying to capture. And you can see what the landscape looked like in the lower left-hand corner there. The next picture. There's a couple stories behind this this particular picture. Yes, I won the Nat Geo Traveler contest in '96. I certainly didn't expect to do that. That sent me off on all expenses paid for 2 people to Nepal, plus $2,500. It was an amateur contest. I still felt I was an amateur because I wasn't doing this full time. For about 7 years, I'd been building a library, a film library. And so that was a different excursion, because now, rather than tooling around in a little car and shooting off a beanbag off the window, I was riding elephants several times and extended my trip after being with the tour operation that took me over there after winning the prize. You can see what's going on with Velvia film. Sigma lens 70 to 300, CPL is circular polarizing filter, and the tripod. The second story is that we all get entrenched with going from point A to B, but we forget what happens in between. There's maybe great lighting. You might get acrobatics with aerial acrobatics with eagles, or in my case, racing from Bozeman over to Yellowstone Park, which is about an hour and a half drive. The lights coming over the mountains, and it's mostly agricultural area. And there are times when you just have to stop. Rather than racing to point B because you heard on the news or Facebook that there was a carcass alongside the road and a grizzly kept coming to it. But by the time you get there, the rangers had removed the carcass, which is normal, so that there aren't traffic jams, and there is no grizzly. Well, the same thing was happening when I was trying to hike up the sand dune. And I'm racing against light again, and I'm trying to get the patterns that are forming. I took a breather, turned around and looked, and this is the shot I got. And like I said, you can see the equipment I'm using. So with that point in mind, just think about when you leave home and you're going to point B, there's all that interim where there's something else exciting that might be happening. So with all my excursions into Southern Africa from 1987 to 2010, and going about 12, 13 times, I've been on the continent, some other places, Morocco and Kenya as well. I did this for 2 to 6 months at a time. And with that time, and whenever I travel, particularly overseas, I allot quite a bit of time to stay in one place, to absorb and to observe. If I'm constantly rushed, I think the artistic, the creative juices sort of get lost because I'm in a rush, and I don't want to be in a rush. So during that time, I had a lot of chances to just keenly observe wild behaviors. So many times when there was a lion kill, we'll say near the road or a little bit off the road, lots of traffic. And then once the lions would leave, go into the bush, they would miss the next scene, which was actually the interaction now between 4 or 5 species of vultures coming in, the hyenas that came in that used my car as a blind, and I was there by myself for 5 hours. That was one of the scenes back in 2010. So I recorded with camera and with pen in hand, and while I was in Southern Africa, I started tapping publishers there and got into magazines, their calendars. It was very easy. My base camp was out of Johannesburg, much easier than actually being in Bozeman, Montana. But by 2007, Far Country Press out of Helena, Montana, tapped me and asked if I would be interested in submitting for this idea, portrait of, they had already done portrait of the Tetons, now it was Paradise, and which is a photo book on the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. So the ecosystem stretches far beyond the boundaries of the park. I said, sure, I'll do it. I sent 600 slides going through them is very tedious, just like what Tricia had mentioned. And every time I went through them, I thought, I've got to say something like, wow, wow. And there are a few pictures in there that I wouldn't say, wow. And that's something you learn with the publishers. What you like may not be like what they actually want, especially for, we'll say, editorial. It's quite a bit different than a photo book. At any rate, that particular book is about 98% film. Now, I had gone to digital in 2005. I overlapped with film. I found it exhausting, time consuming, and expensive. So that was for about 1.5 to 2 years. By 2008, I'd had this idea about wildlife in Africa with behaviors, actually on survival. I had tapped some of the American publishers, but I didn't have my thoughts and ideas organized well enough to convince any of the American publishers that my idea was marketable. 2008, I realized that, look, just break everything up into chapters. So I put together 11 chapters that I sent to Random Strike in Cape Town, South Africa, and asked if they would be interested in this idea. They said, great, yes, we're interested. We'd like you to do the wildlife part. Well, this is going to be a 1 in a 3-part series book. The other 2 parts on flora and fauna and landscape. They also asked me to write the text, which was quite short, about 70 words to be beginning of each chapter. And they compiled it, compressed it better with the words than what I did. So the survival ideas were such as the first chapter has to do with water hole. We need water, so do they. Not all the animals need water every day. It went through different behavioral chapters, maneuvers, with another one being displays and disputes, or territorialism, which is basically a male wanting the right to mate with 20 elk cows, or in this case, zebras, or any of the herd animals. Much the same that we go through, only we don't look at it that way. So the survival thing came onto the bookshelves in 2010. And when I arrived in 2010, I had a bunch of books. So when I was traveling, I sold them on my own, which helped offset my expenses. You'll see that the cheetah is the same on both sides. Now in 2004, I was robbed twice. Once in Namibia and the other time Pretoria, South Africa. And I lost my equipment. I lost all my exposed film, except for the lens that's being advertised. This is a 120 to 300 2.8, extremely sharp and yet heavy lens put out by Sigma at that time. It had no image stabilization. I was staying with South African friends who are top photographers with their own book publishing and the whole works. And they convinced me that I should go about an hour away to a rehab center where there were cheetahs, a baby rhino, etc. It's not my style of photographing. I don't like setups. I like to beat the bushes. And if I only come across an insect for 2 weeks, yeah, I'm probably reading a book and bearing with whatever weather changes are happening. But it's part of the adventure is how I look at it. So off I tootled to the rehab center, got a hold of the woman who fed the cheetahs that were eventually rewilded. And we jumped into her pickup truck and started tootling down the gravel road when all these cheetahs came out of the bush, 6 or 7 of them following us. I'm like, we gotta stop. I can't get a shot with a road in it like this. So we stopped, got out of the pickup, walked into the bush. Sure enough, the cheetah charged. I wasn't ready. It was unexpected. And I had, what was not stolen was this particular lens in my big 500 Canon, which was in the trunk of the car at the time. So I says, we need a replay. And Julie said, what do you want me to do? I says, well, I want you to kneel. I want you to kneel. I'm going to look over your shoulder. Meanwhile, I noticed that the cheetah had sat down, which was typical. Ingrid, one of the South African friends who had photographed, rehabbed cheetahs, had said, they'll charge, they'll sit, they'll snarl, they'll spit, and they'll slink away. And that's exactly what this cheetah did. And sure enough, we got a replay. I shot it in vertical. Sigma was ecstatic, and I sent it in. I got 3 shots on film, and this is how this ad came about for that particular lens. A few years later, they put image stabilizing to it. I realized that when I came back to the States, who is going to be interested in publishing solely African? And I'd been going, my second favorite place was the Southwest, particularly Utah, into northern Arizona, parts of Colorado. And I was shooting landscapes, and when the light became harsh, I'd go out and look for lizards. I never thought I'd be able to get close to lizards. Well, this is a common collared lizard in breeding season, a male, and he's sitting there sunning himself. I'm using, you can see, a 70 to 200 with a close-up filter. Now, the close-up filter I'm using allows me 14 inches from my subject, and my subject is usually, or had been at least, lizards and butterflies. So I didn't want to get so close that I would frighten them away. And then there's also I would stalk slowly, and I learned that if I'm using a tripod, I could not extend a leg towards the lizard. Lizards are very visual. That I needed to extend 2 on the either side of me, and the third leg towards me, but not towards the lizard. And to get them to look up, I'd take off my hat, raise my arm, and they'd look up, and that's when I'd start shooting. They have a very human-like pupil, most lizards. So I put together, I must have had over 20, 25 species of lizards, and I tapped the reptile magazines with stories as well. My interest kept expanding, and so diversification for me has been important because of publishing, not necessarily because of fine art and trying to sell that way. So on the lower left, you see that beautiful golden retriever. His name was Bill. His little friend is Azul. She's a lab Australian Shepherd mixed. And when my dog died in the early 2000s, a friend asked me if I would dog sit. And actually quite a few friends started asking me, would you dog sit? And I love working with dogs in particular, and I enjoy being around animals. And Bill had an older brother, Rocket. And when I started walking Rocket, and then Bill came along 6 or 8 months later as a puppy, I realized that I've got a gold mine right next to me. Calendars love golden retrievers. So I asked my friend if it was all right if I photographed the dogs, and she said, absolutely. So to this day, there are many shots of Bill and his brother, or one single, in calendars, brown trout, Willow Creek, a couple of them, a couple of the calendars. And then on the lower right, you see that here's Angkor Wat in Siem Reap, Cambodia, one of the biggest ancient civilizations that I've been to. So by 2010, publishing was falling by the wayside. I feel it was due to recession. You had newspapers that were letting their editorial staff go. Even at Geo, I believe, let their staff go. They opened it up to freelancers. They didn't have calendars, were falling by the wayside. My Reptiles magazine, etc. Digital cameras were in, and social media. I'm not a big fan of social media. I don't even have Instagram or Facebook. I'm probably missing the boat on that. So if a photo editor saw a great shot of an elephant or golden retriever, grizzly bear, whatever, they'd probably get a hold of that photographer who was just delighted to, yeah, go ahead and use my photo. Well, that has hurt the professional photographer big time, because places would love to have people volunteer. And well, the professional photographer now is starting to think about workshops. There's a lot of us that went into workshops, including myself, but also at the same time, our adult community education was asking me to teach photography. So I did that for 9.5 years until COVID hit. And once COVID hit, I had to get out of Greece. And when I returned, I saw how, the social distancing was affecting people. So I offered to my advanced students who've now been with me anywhere from 3 to 7 or 8 years, if they would be interested in a photography class, but we're going to do it outside. Instead of 4 walls, our classroom is outside. They have assignments. They have to write their process. How did you take that picture? What was, and put all their metadata on the picture, including their name, and give that photo a title as well. And the process is everything we had been doing in class. Whenever I gave a lecture, we showed the assignments. What was your process? So that everyone's learning that, yes, I'm not the only one who trips over the tripod or drop a filter or suddenly the camera's fallen on the ground. Some of the humorous things, as well as the difficult part. The storm started to come in, they got wet or snowed on, whatever it was. My last 2 classes have been with the Lens Baby. And Linda put that Lens Baby, 56mm velvet, into my hands last fall. And I thought, okay, this is going to be a challenge. Okay, it goes back to manual, same as my 12mm. It's a very slow process. It's best if you can be on a tripod. And with the Velvet series, the extreme glow effect is from 1.6 up to f4, where you get a little more definition and a little bit less glow. By 5.6, it's pretty much on track like your other lenses. Within the Edges class, with my 7 or 8 students using the Lens Baby, we didn't start with that particular lens, and they all, except for one person, bought the lens. That lens is a macro. So I had them go out and shoot a very mundane subject that they saw every day but never paid any attention to it. That was our fuel tanks with the stairs winding around it. And when it's sunny, you get the shadows. So working with edges, we're dealing with the edges of the fuel tanks as well as the stairs. And most of them went back 2 times, 3 times, and they kept seeing different things. And that's the way I tackle any subject, whether it's overseas, like going back to Africa for over 23 years. And people ask me, aren't you getting tired? I says, with wildlife, you never get tired because there's always something different. And whether it's sunny or cloudy, that same subject is showing something different as well. So within the Edges title, they had subtitles where they worked on an assignment. This particular one is in tandem. So these are my photos. I'm shooting, thinking about my f-stop with the foreground, letting the stairs in the background go a little bit soft, but not too much. Certainly not as much as the flower picture, being sharp. And then in tandem is either next to each other or can be behind each other. Another one was peeking through. And when I asked my students, what flower would you relate the stairs to in the fuel tanks? And one student said, peeking through, tulips, when you think about the petals encompassing the interior. How do you use this lens? That was the question, because it's manual, there is no auto on it. So where do we focus? And what is sharp? How do you get sharp? Well, there's a focusing ring, but with your aperture, the best thing is to start at about f8 or even 5.6 to try and get it sharp. So now you have to focus. And I focus with my left hand. I'm on a tripod. And I'm releasing the shutter, if not with a cable release. And I'm looking at the pine cone that's facing me. So you focus on the end of that pine cone. Now, if you start at f8 or 5.6, work your way down to f4, 2.8, 2, 1.6. If you're in manual, you have to adjust the shutter. You have to. If you're in aperture, the shutter is adjusting on its own. So you don't have to worry too much about exposure. You go to the second picture. This was something I saw with the chess set on a Comcast, one of those screens that come up with all these pictures. I'm like, that's interesting. I have a chess set. So I set everything up and I had to look at the rules because I couldn't remember where the queen belonged. She belonged on her own color or on the dark color. Well, it was on her own color. Took a variety of pictures. I'm like, I don't like anything. I'm going to go back to the picture that I saw on Comcast, which is basically the queen leaning against the king or vice versa. Shooting at 1.6 where I get this very ethereal glow. The picture down below it is an Ulstermaria flower. Now, when we finally went from pine cones, well, fuel tanks and railroad tracks and into pine cones, they got into their flowers. Again, it's a macro lens. Experimenting with which f-stop do you want to show, and maybe the assignment says only go from 1.6 to f4, so you understand what's happening with the intensity of the glow. But even at f8, you can see where I focus, basically on the droplets, and letting the petal curve towards me, and yet I'm getting the backside with the beautiful patterns on this Ulstermaria. So f8. When you start thinking f8, f11 is where I often shoot my scenes, is how much background do you want soft? The background that's behind me right now, that subtitle was they had to work with a feather. They had to shoot the feather edge and then somehow incorporate a flower. All these assignments have been actually tough for me. So I have to go through them. I spend an hour and a half, 2 hours. I don't like anything. I can't show them anything as an example. So I have to go back to it the next day. And if I'm doing flowers before they wilt, and not always are you wanting to go and shoot them in the house, or usually I'm out in the garage and put them on the trash bin and try to set them up where it's not windy. So the one in the background is the feather at, again, at 1.6, getting this softness. This leads us into the artistry of shutter speed. And we all go out trying to get that tack sharp image, and that's great. I get as excited as anybody. And this particular image on the lower left is our elk rut that occurs about the 3rd week in September into another 2 weeks into early October. He's just been thrashing. He's posturing now. He's ready to charge in and claim maybe 15 cows as his harem, but he might have to defeat the present bull. And your lighting is only in the evening, about 5:45 to about 7:15. And that actually 5:45 to about 6:45, and then it's starting to get a little bit dark. And that's where I start pushing, lowering or not pushing, but reducing my shutter speed. So going back to the lower left, surrounding me is about 200 other people on the gravel road, and we're all getting the same picture. So I'm thinking I need to do something different. Then I'm reducing that shutter. You can see the upper right, what's happening, and getting a little more impressionistic photo with the artistry of shutter speed. Now, the time in between, I'm giving a workshop to someone here in Bozeman or up in Canada. There's plenty of time to set the camera up. A lot of people say, I didn't have time, I didn't have time. Well, you do have time. You just don't realize you get 2 minutes of time before whatever next might happen. So here I'm just stressing that if you've shot flowers or lizards and you need to ID, I'm carrying all these guidebooks with me, and I'm IDing them when I'm out there, and it's a dead time for me rather than at home, because we all know how long it takes us to get through all the images that we've shot. This is how you set up your camera. Something I stress is to bring up your LCD screen, get the histogram next to the picture you've just taken. On the upper left, my speed is 1/25 of a second. You can see the histogram to the right is the little white mountain is veering to the right of the center. It's overexposed. This is important. I'm in aperture priority. In my own mind, and learning all of this on film, that when have been photographing a fence line in a field of snow, my camera is shutting down. Thus, I have to add light, or I'm sorry, take away. I have to add light to get the proper exposure. When it's dark, it's completely opposite. The camera's opening up too much. So now you have to take away light on that. So the camera setup process before taking a picture is that the upper left is overexposed. The bottom right is our little mountain there is veering a little bit to the left of the center. And it's interesting because I always shot this way on film cameras. The film that I kept was usually a little bit underexposed. And I find that when I'm a little bit underexposed, when I put the photos on the computer, my exposure is more tack on than if my little mountain is in the center. So I've gone from 1/25 to 1/50. So that's about minus about a stop. This camera, this setup on the back of the screen, you can, during that dead time, you take a picture of the area that your subject's going to be. It's not yet in there, and you look at your exposure and you lock it in. You can lock it in. On my system, you see 3 little buttons to the upper right on the camera. The middle one has an asterisk or a star. When you press that, it locks in. You can lock it into whole, and that gives you about 4 to 5 seconds. Or if you go into manual, it'll stay at 50th F4, which is set here. Now, this is something as old as I feel like my cameras are antique compared to all the mirrorless systems that are coming out. It was only a year ago in April that I was shooting at a waterfalls. And I was taking my time, I was not set up on a tripod, and I started fiddling like, well, let's use live view, because I rarely have used live view in all my years of photographing, over 30 years. And what came up on my screen was not the histogram, but all the other settings, which I usually use on the screen that's on top of my camera. But what perplexed me was EXPSIM. That's exposure simulation. I hadn't read anything about this in the camera manuals are pretty bad. I didn't know what it was. I figured out exposure simulation. What is it? So I just started pressing info again. I'd already pressed it about 3 times and all this came up. And I'm like, whoa, my histogram suddenly popped up. I don't have to figure out my exposure anymore. I was so excited. I was teaching a class at the time, mostly Nikons and Canons, figured out the Nikon and said, okay, this is what you need to do, put it in live view, get your exposure, simulation, look at the histogram. Right now, my metadata is 80th of a second, a shutter, f4. Keep the speed in your mind. If you know you want f4, whatever the f-stop is, that's going to get locked in. Note that 80th of a speed is correct. If you want to go back to looking through your viewfinder, then shoot, but make sure you're at 80th of a second. Using the histogram it took me probably about 4 years on digital to really understand how to use the histogram. I was so used to looking at my film and relying on my own eye that when a friend explained it, how to use the histogram, is suddenly the light bulb went on in my brain. So my the thought process actually doesn't quite begin with light in my position. The thought process is at home with the research. Do I want to go to Quake Lake where these cormorants are shot the next day? If I do, is it going to be cloudy or is it going to be sunny? That's the first thing. How am I going to dress? And wind. Wind is an important factor. Linda can attest to this because she was out there with me and the wind hit us. Fortunately, we weren't too far from where the boat ramp was. And when the wind does come up, you're getting waves over the bow of your kayak, which means equipment might be getting wet unless you're in a dry bag. So I usually go on a sunny morning because the wind usually comes up about 11 a.m. It's about an hour and 45 minutes for me. And Quake Lake is interesting because there are dead trees throughout the lake because of an earthquake in 1959. As soon as I set out, I'm looking directly into the sun. And I'm taking practice shots before anything happens to get to see what my shutter speed is going to be. On a sunny day, my ISO doesn't have to be too extravagant. So my shutter speed, when it comes to birds flying, I'd say 1/1600. When it comes to mammals, 1/1000th of a second. How much background do I want? Do I want a great depth of field or not? So you can see I'm at 7.1 upper left, ISO is 400, shutter speed 1/1250. Now I'm hand holding a 1:400 lens while I'm in the kayak, which means the paddle has to balance in my lap. Now, just because I'm on the lake doesn't mean it's just smooth sailing, because there's a current and the bow of the boat is constantly twisting. So I have to somehow grab that paddle, stick it in the water and sort of back paddle to turn my boat to the left or right, whichever way the birds might be moving. So looking into the, shooting backlit, so I'm looking into the sun. So the next thing here, when it comes to moving subjects, know the behavior of your subject. With the dead trees and the cormorants, when they're on the lower limbs, they jump off and just sort of paddle away. Nothing exciting. But when they're on an upper limb and they jump off, they start running. That's when you quickly don't lose your paddle, get your lens up and start shooting. Choosing my lens is a definite part of my thought process. So before I go to Quake Lake tomorrow, I'm deciding, do I want to use just the 1:400 or the 500 and get a shot like lower right? Or do I take both? They will, one or the other will fit between my feet. I have a dry bag down there, but it's not securely latched, so to speak, and where I can pull the camera out quickly with action. So lower right, I'm not looking into the sun, but I have enough time to paddle around. I take practice shots. Again, I'm on ISO 400. You can see what my speed is, 1/5000, f4.5. I don't want a background, but I want to get them running across the water. It's one of my favorite ways of getting birds when they're running. Note the metadata and what I'm doing on these pictures. I have my students do this all the time because when they turn in assignments and I critique or comment them and I look at their process and see what their settings are by looking at the pictures, it makes me understand if they're at 12,000 ISO, I'm like, why are you on such a high ISO? It tells me that they're not understanding what's going on with their metadata. Also, all these pictures get turned back to them and to everybody, so everybody gets to read the process. And after that, I do one-on-one personal phone calls. I've avoided the Zoom until now. The before the action happens, again, I can't stress this enough. Take practice shots. This is a young osprey. You can tell because the feathers are tipped in white. The adults are brown. Now I've stayed with this family of osprey for about 12 weeks. I saw them as chicks, and the advantage point is that it's a nest where you can sit above it, which is great. And is all you do is park across the road, walk across the road, hop over the railing next to the road, lean back against it, bring some water with you, maybe an apple. I usually bring 2 lenses, the 1-4 to 500, within 20 to 30 meters. That's how close they are. So with the 500, I understand that I am so close that I might be cropping wings. And this is what's happening, I think, in this particular picture. So I was there when the one chick got enough bravery about himself, decided to hop around in the nest, jumped up and down. You see all the behavior with the adult female and the other chick who moved aside, so he had hopping room, and then he flew. The background is not the sky, but it's the river. So I've focused on the nest where it's brighter than what the river is to get an idea of what my shutter speed is. And when the birds fly in, and it's usually the male flying in because the female has squawked and screeched saying, look, we're hungry, you need to feed us. And the male is off across the river in his favorite conifer tree. He says, okay, I'm on my way. Give me 15, 20 minutes. And when he came in, he either had a stick or a fish to deliver with this little fledged osprey. It's landed and it's perched, and now it's given me a wing spread. So now I'm looking at the pattern artistry. So I've put up 2 different scenes here, one overcast, one bright. But I've also, the pine cone reoccurs here. When you look at both, if you're so used to shooting flowers or pine cones, and you think that you cannot shoot wildlife, no, it's not so true. Look at the shape and form here. So similar. You want to focus, manual focus with your little lens, baby, on that lead part, the forefront, the front of the pine cone. It's the same thing that's going on in my mind as this line of bison a year ago, February or January 2021, with the bison coming down the road. I'd shot them previously. You don't always get this opportunity. And when you see this kind of a lineup, it's like a magical moment. I'm thinking, okay, you got to focus on the front. What's my f-stop? Okay, I don't need an f8. Also, they're far enough away. I know I can grab my 500. So I've got 2 cameras on the seat next to me, the 500 and the 1-4. I grab the 500, they're far enough away. I get full bodied, I'm focused. Why I chose F5, I'm not sure, except that I'm hand holding. I'm at ISO 400 because it's overcast. I can hand hold at 1250. So the guideline about hand holding is whatever your focal length is. In this case, let's say it's the 500mm lens on a full frame, you want that speed or greater. If you're a little bit shaky, and as we get a little bit older, we get a little bit more shaky, then you better push your ISO up to get a higher speed. If I went to F8, my speed is going to drop down to about 750 or maybe 500, which is little bit tenuous here. So I'm going to have to pump up my ISO. And at F8, do I actually want more background in focus? So this picture, when it's blown up a little bit bigger, the eyes are sharp, the nose is sharp, everything is on the same, basically the same plane in a vertical position. The horns are starting to fall off, and so are the ears, and then the other animals are definitely falling off. Now, the hoof, I'm watching also, now I'm taking a few shots, but my eyes go down to the feet. And I tell my students to do the same when you're getting something that's moving fast, whether it's your pet, your dog, or bison running or horses running, rather than still looking at the body, take your eyes to the movement to the feet. I'm looking at the rising of the hoof, and that's when you want to take a picture because that shows motion. Once that foot or hoof hits the ground, it's static. And you can see there are other hoofs that are in motion. So these animals are coming. I'm sure they're coming right by the car. I probably put the 500 back in the car, grabbed the 1 to 400, and I think probably I took a few more shots. And then I jumped in the car and let them pass by. The bottom left here now is completely opposite. I had all the control I needed. The person is one of my students. I asked her if she would model. I told her what clothes to wear and to bring a scarf that had tassels on it so that when you flip it over the right shoulder, walking away from me, it would show motion. Because on the left, you have form. Remember with a silhouette, it's basically shape. The fence gives you depth of field. So here, how much f-stop do you want? And so it all depends on that fence line. So you can see that I'm not, I've got to, I don't know if I can do this. I've lost my, I want to, okay. I can't see what I've got written on the bottom because all the pictures of the people viewing are down there, what my settings are, but I'm using a 70 to 200. The dog on the left is mine. Her name's Sophie. She's 14 months old now. And on the right, my student brought her a little corgi. So they fill that space. But the main idea was to get the sunset. You can see that there's a bit of a slope. If I were to move 15 feet up that slope or 10 feet, in the background was going to be rooftops of Bozeman and mountains in the background, which would not give me my silhouette effect in a beautiful sky. So all this goes back to research. Might be a Monday, I'm like, okay, I've got to get my class into that position. And along the fence line going towards me, there was a broken down fence post. And that was my position for where we needed to stand. Where my model needed to be was where that vertical post is. And even in shooting in vertical would give you more color into the sunset. And when you're looking for sunsets, this is where you want partly sunny or partly cloudy. You want clouds in the sky. If it says sunny and clear, forget about a fantastic sunset. It won't happen because there aren't any clouds. And actually that night when I called my student, she's like, I don't think there's going to be a sunset. Yes, there's a crack in the sky and there's going to be a fantastic sunset. So she joined me and she went off. So everything was set up there. Using a 70 to 200 was again, knowing my distance to my models. If I took my 1 to 400, it would be more about the silhouettes than the sky. And I wanted to incorporate the sky. So on a few days later, I had my class out. We had a great sunset and there was a second class for those who couldn't make it. There was a sunset, but then the clouds came in and not near as good as our first night. So that's important, especially the idea of shape and form with shooting in this kind of an angle with the bison and the pine cone versus the silhouette. When you get an animal, grizzly, you can see lower right that no great shot. This particular image is in the current Yellowstone calendar. It's a 10.5 by 14 inch, and it's just as sharp as can be. And I usually tell people, as well as myself, go to F8, make sure you have enough speed, because of you focus at the eye, but you've got the depth of field. Now, Sophie is a 75-pound Bernedoodle. She said, Mom, you better measure me so you know what to tell people at the Santa Rosa Club, because from her eye to the tip of her nose is 4 inches. So with a grizzly, it's much more. F8's going to give you sharpness here. So I cropped it in pretty tight to go on the calendar. I go out with the idea of capturing the essence of the weather. I don't like maneuvering all over the place with my editing. My editing is basic with my sliders, and that's what I teach when people are trying to understand how to edit. So as a nature photographer, you become aware of your habitat and environmental conditions, and that is also going to dictate which lens do you want to use. This particular picture, I wanted this scene with the animals, and knowing my environmental conditions, this is usually in March up here. The snowflakes are bigger because it's more humid. In January, February, maybe late December, we get the blizzards and we get the snowstorms, not the nice fluttering large snowflakes. So that's understanding your cold, freezing to wet, how to dress and prepare for your environmental conditions. Hoarfrost on the windows. This is a ghost town, upper right hand corner. And it happens on our windows, but with hoarfrost, and if you're looking for hoarfrost, often I look for hoarfrost when I'm going in to the park in January or February. January is usually our coldest month. You need humidity. If you don't have humidity, you won't get the hoarfrost. Lower left, the bison here is coming up from thermals, has hoarfrost all along its coat, on its nose, possibly from a thermal as well as steam. And the one on the right is not hoarfrost, it's impacted snow, because when they're trying to feed, they're moving their heads back and forth in very, very deep snow to get down to grasses to munch on. Wind blown, so 2 winters ago, I decided to go in to Yellowstone when there was a blizzard. Getting there is the problem, because you have a pass to go over, and often it can be closed or very icy. And this year I went in and I'm like, I'm not doing this again. They even closed the road in Yellowstone. I'm like, can I get back to Gardner, my exit? Yes, that road's still open, but it was so bad I could only see our depth markers. I couldn't see anything in front of me. But when they're bison or windblown, or the animals, I should say, half of them are chocolate, the other half is white. One day in February, I went in a few months ago, and it was actually a boring day. It was high hazy, and there was a small herd of bison, maybe 10 or 12 of them. They're all lying there with their backs to me. Nothing exciting except this one bison, lower right-hand corner. It was either a young calf or a female. And every time she exuded breath, she was standing in the perfect position, because now the steam was showing up with the background, the bison that was lying near where she was standing. You can see the crystals forming on the front of her face, as well as on her neck fur and her chin fur, becoming kind of hoary-like. Then I realized I had grabbed my 1 to 400, walked about 100 yards from the car, just observing, just taking my time. No one was with me. There was no pressure. And just watching. I'm like, you know, I can crop this when I get home, because I was too lazy to grab the 500, which was sitting on the front seat as well. And just started to shoot and then cropped it into this, the picture on the upper right. Flying over Grand Prismatic Spring, I did it twice, and I'm hoping to go up again as soon as the weather gets warm enough. Because if you go up and it's too cool in the morning, it is so steamy, you can't see anything. The first time I went up in a little bush plane, it was a friend of one of my students who is a pilot, and he's in an Alaskan bush plane, which can go as slow as 80 miles an hour. He doesn't know anything about photography, and I'm changing my lenses, but mostly using a 70 to 200. And the first time I went out, nothing came out sharp. And I was pretty frustrated with it and had to pay an amount of money. And so when we got landed, I told Joe the problems with sitting in the back seat where my knees are practically touching my chin, and I can't twist around very easily. And I'm shooting through plexiglass. That was the main problem. He says, well, I can take the door off or open the window, depending if you're sitting in the front or in the back. And I'm like, great, but is it safe? Yes, you're not going to fall out. So come early October, I reshot and got a shot like this, which is actually on the cover of the 2023 Yellowstone calendar. What they're seeing is at the bottom right-hand corner from the boardwalk, which is beautiful bacteria mat. Colors leading into that blue pool. Other problems with it is the vibration of the plane. There's a slight vibration. So when I sent up students, I gave them a lecture on speed and not to worry about f-stop and which lenses to use to get this kind of a scene. Going from extreme cold into the drier, more heated conditions, this idea came to mind. Dust, the Photographer's Choking Dream, was published in a South African medical magazine in which they always featured travel articles. And I got in there for about 10 years straight, which was great because that helped offset my expenses when I went to Southern Africa. Dust is everywhere. And in Africa, you're always getting the blood red sun. So the same zebras are racing away from the water hole. This is actually in Namibia. And so is the elephant, watching behavior again, because this cow elephant, female elephant, had a baby with her. And then suddenly she stopped, put her trunk to the ground. Suddenly the dust came, and they have a routine where they toss the dust to the left, to the right, and then over their head. Then they repeat that motion. Dust provides spectacular photos, including the one on the right, which is the draft. Looks easy, but not so. I'm driving, I'm by myself, and I'm having to block the sun and shoot out, I believe, the passenger window. I'm very aware of the sun rays coming out from under the body, as well as the elongated legs. The draft kept moving, so I had to keep moving. And when you're in the car, you got to shut off the radio and you got to shut off the car because you're going to get vibration. Smoke and steam, fog can give you very ethereal types of pictures. So this is a campfire in Northern California in the Redwoods that I shot actually about 5 or 6 years ago when I was going to visit Linda. So keep that in mind. Dust, steam, some smoke, which I know all of you get too much of it probably. So when it comes to the dust bathing with our bison up here in North America, wildebeest, zebras in Africa, the time in between is you see a dirt patch, stop, pull over on the side of the road. And if you see one bison coming down the hill wait, because they're coming to do their dust bathing, kicking their legs up. So shoot into that dusty area, that dirt area before the bison, get your histogram, understand what your speed needs to be, lock it in, take another practice shot, and now you've got the bison there and he's rolling, kicking up everything. Don't despair, because once he gets up, and if there's a nice big pile of dust, like in the upper two pictures, you'll get him enshrouded in dust when he shakes. And again, the same thing happens with your zebras, the wildebeests, with this kind of action. Taking my dust idea to the ancient ruins in Cambodia, Angkor Wat, was during the fall of 2019 in March, when the sweepers were out sweeping up the leaves. I jumped out of my little tuk-tuk with a 24-105 attached, because I know I'm going to be shooting scenes or the temples, not needing a long lens. I didn't even think about shooting in slow shutter speed. So capturing her and the dust sort of swirling around some of the pillars, columns on the right side of her. And you can see the dust filtering into the temple where I was at, and the two people starting to approach. And so the sun is filtering through that dust, giving you a very nice ethereal look here. The unexpected, when tack sharp photographing. So I'm photographing the Costco cranes, I think 3 years ago, 2020. And I'm focused in on, the adult is lying there, and one little one climbed on top of, now they're called colts, climbed up on top, and suddenly I saw something fall through my viewfinder. Well, I happened to capture the little one tumbling, kicking with its feet up. Now, the year following, I was sitting at the nest where there was one colt, waiting for some action, nothing exciting happening, but on the lower left, these are snipes during their mating ritual in May, just last year, 2021. And they were in the grasses, and they're somewhat camouflaged, get some action shots, but suddenly about 30 yards away, these two were performing over the in the grasses, which were lawns, where the cranes are at is around condos, apartments, walkways, the whole works. And I was sitting there with my 500, just panned over to them, locked in. I would say I was in one shot, not in tracking, which is my usual mode is one shot. When I get frustrated with that, then I start trying the tracking. When I get frustrated with that, then I go back to one shot. Because with one shot, your focus locks in, and I'm on a beep telling me that I'm locked in. And I captured these two in about 3 or 4 shots. So that's what the green is all about. That's a manicured lawn. The unexpected, I was giving a workshop to one of my students up in north central Montana in the end of March, when the snow geese come in. There's over 300,000 of them that come in, and they fly off in sort of family groups. So they keep coming in, maybe thousands at a time, but not at 300,000 at one time. The black and white is just a reminder that when you have a lot of contrasting light and the colors aren't really too exciting, let's say, try it in black and white and work your contrast here. And so when I first started shooting the Priest Butte, those are the 3 flat top buttes. The Rocky Mountain front is in the background. I kept wishing, God, I wish the geese would fly through, and sure enough, they did. Then when I kept traveling along the road, it's just a gravel rural road, and I'm thinking I need something in the foreground, when I finally came across the grain bin and that path, which I didn't even, the path being a road, which I didn't even notice. And now the rays are coming through the clouds in a different direction and get these shots. So I'm taking a slight break to see if there are questions about this first part. Research positioning, this is tack sharp. Next part, we get into slower shutter speeds. Any questions? Is anyone awake?
We're here. We're just muted for a minute.
Love all
Um,
your wildlife photos.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, the dust, that was amazing.
Yeah.
And you know, for I'm gonna say centuries, I shoot in one shot rather than tracking. And maybe 5 or 6 years with teaching, you know, with teaching it, you're learning, it's a learning process also with the questions that come about and people saying, hey, I shoot in manual. Well, I always shot in aperture priority. And I thought, gosh, when my students are shooting in manual, do I need to make them go into aperture only because I understand it? So I learned manual on my own, which is relatively easy. And I explained it somewhat with the manual lens baby, that when you go from f4 to 1.6, everything's opening up, that you're going to have to take away light. So you have to reduce your speed, or get more speed to offset. So anytime with f-stops, the bigger the f-stop, such as f4 or 2.8, you're going to have to go in the opposite direction with your speed. So manual came relatively easy to me, and I've learned that I intertwine both of them together. If something exciting like birds flying or mammals or racing around, I often get my shutter using aperture. I lock it in and then I dial manual and I go, okay, I need f4 or 5.6, whatever, and I need at least 1,000th of a speed with mammals. 1600, you're pretty safe with birds. The smaller the bird, the faster your speed needs to be. And I can't stress using your histogram. And you know, with all the newer equipment, the mirrorless, that histogram's right in there. So I tell my students there's no reason for your exposure to be off.
Mhm.
Next part, we're going into the slower shutter speeds unless there are questions. And then I'm going to, but first I'm going to show just a 1-minute artistry of flight and feather.
Okay.
If there are any questions?
Nope. Loving it.
Waiting for you to get your mirrorless camera.
What was that, Linda?
When are you going to get a mirrorless camera?
I don't know. You know, there was just the Nikons and Reps were up here last week. Our store, the Bozeman camera store, moved its location. And I don't know, it's tempting, but I still like the challenge of my DSLRs. I think even if you're brushing your teeth, you can just pull your camera up, not even look, and get the shot. And so I question the artistry of photography. The art of photography, I think, is somewhat being lost. You can take an average picture and make it fantastic on the computer. I like getting it when I'm out there, actually. Okay, I'm going to keep moving ahead here. I'm trying to make sure my sound, I'm going to reduce it a little, because now we've got a minute with the artistry of flight and feather. Okay. Oop. Here we go. Not quite. I'm trying to back up here. Okay. So we move into blurred movement, slow shutter. So this next short part here is when your subject moves into your camera, into your viewfinder, without too much panning or ICM camera movement. And you can see the shutter speed is 1/80th. This is a flock of quailias, and this is in Etosha National Park, taken quite a few years ago. I was getting tired of the flock moving from one bush to the other and me trying to get tack sharp. So I thought, well, let's try slow shutter speed. So this is what I got. And with my slow shutter speed, I like the animal or the bird somewhat defined with the blur of the wing. This is a wood duck. The trying to get the head sharp and the wing blur is experimental. You're going to end up throwing a lot away. That's fine. This guy was by himself. It was great that he was isolated. You can see that it's there's not a whole lot of sun. It's an overcast day, so my ISO is a little bit high here. The 1/200th of a second, 5.6. Now that was guesswork. I'm focused on the head. And understanding the behavior, it comes back to behavior of your moving subjects. When ducks or geese or swans immerse themselves in water and they're bathing, stay on them because they'll rise up, they'll stand up, and they'll flap their wings to dry off. And that's exactly what's happening here. And I was thankful that he moved away because there's another group of birds, ducks over to the right, I would say. If I had gone to 320 on speed, the wing blur would be softer. His head probably, or not as soft, I should say, while his head is sharper. If I'd gone to 1/60th, there'd be more wing blur, and yet the head probably wouldn't be sharp. So, and you can see I'm using a 500 with a 1.4 tele here. It's not easy to do. And one thing with photographing wildlife, if you don't have the patience and move on, then it's going to be hard to capture things consistently. And yes, I still throw a lot away and delete. So in 2021, I thought, okay, I want to go back, as I mentioned before, when there's blizzards. So I wanted to do experimental in a blizzard with it snowing. I'm shooting from on a beanbag, which I'll comment about in a few minutes here. Off the car window, I'm using a 500 millimeter on the upper left-hand corner, 1/50th, f/18. This is experimental. I'm throwing it away. I'm trying to focus on the horn. If you're using a cable release, that's best. I don't think I used a cable release. I'm using my finger to release the shutter, which might cause some vibration. So I got the action of the snow. Upper right, again, shows you that it's a blizzard. They're wind impacted. The snow, I should say, snow impacted 40th of a second, f/14 with the 1/400 on a beanbag. And lower right shows you that half of them are snow, full of snow, while the other half isn't. Now, the beanbag I'm using is one that Linda makes. So several years ago when she was in my classes, I said, do you want to go into business? Because I learned that she sewed. She said, well, what kind of business? And I says, making beanbags. And I had been using a beanbag for 15, 20 years previous to meeting Linda. And this little beanbag, you can see how it sits. It has little feet. You fill it with about 2.5 pounds of rice. And off you go. And so she made one or two. I says, we need to go under quality control check. Well, the first two were blunders. The legs weren't long enough. the dimensions are quite accurate. The strap that holds the legs together, there was too long. Things weren't going quite well. So she went back with a smile on her face and redid them. Great. So sold, I don't know, a lot of them. They selling for $40. Next, she says, they ran out of denim, but I've got this. So she filled a bean bag. She came along with stretched denim. I'm like, no, no, no. When you're walking with this thing, it's bouncing all over. You don't want that sort of bounce while you're walking with your gear. And you can set this up on a post. So she went back, waited till the store had the denim. And to keep the colors, I would say, fairly neutral so that both men and women buy the bean bag. And Bill Stacy said he bought one. He says it's indispensable, and it is. I carry two because if I'm giving a workshop and they haven't bought one or they forgot theirs, well, here's the second one. Use it. You can put it up, like I said, on a fence post, wherever. This was Mother's Day, and here just a few weeks ago, and we were in a whiteout. So I shot with a 1:400, the upper left-hand corner, just to show the scene that I was in. It was nasty out. I'm shooting, working with the beanbag. And then with the 500 lens, this is a Swainson's Hawk. So lower left is fairly sharp on the bird. And on the right shows the snow coming down. You can see what my speed is. Again, 1/80th, like the Quailias. I kept maneuvering and the bird just stayed there. I was just across the road, but I wanted to get different angles. So then I went forward and then right opposite. And he stayed there for quite a while and then flew off on me. Lo and behold, 1/80th again. I don't know, I'm gonna have to keep that number in mind, I think. I helped a South African friend shoot a wedding down in South Africa a few years ago, several years ago. And it comes back to research. Where do I need to be? What's going to happen with the ceremony? Where did they exit from, etc. So I practiced without anybody, again, envisioning they're coming out this doorway. You can see what lens I'm using, 24-70, that was a Sigma. This was, I would say, this was a luck shot because they're walking slow, they're excited, they're sharp, but look at the rice at 1/80th of a second. It goes back to research and where do I want to be with my position. If you're going out to shoot a field of flowers, in this case, upper left, Teddy Roosevelt National Park, North Dakota, Wind Canyon, the grasses, the wind was howling. And with flowers, don't despair with that. You want to get one flower in the wind. You can't control the wind. So slow your shutter speed down, be on a very low ISO, hunker down and hope that there's enough wind and gusts of wind to really move your flowers. If it's just a slight breeze, it's going to look like you made a mistake. So working with slow shutter speed that way, what's a mistake and what's on purpose, I think is important. And in the background, you can see where I focused. Lower right is in Greece. Again, research, we knew that these ancient arches were built and there was this beautiful waterfall. You can see I'm on 2.5 seconds, the lens I'm using, which is familiar to you by now. I'm set up to get a slow river scene. The friend set up, she said she was already there, but I think she got into my picture and I'm like, darn. And then second thought was, she's on a slow shutter, she's in meditation, I'm gonna photograph her. So she was still for 2.5 seconds. Note the color of her raincoat. That was done on purpose. It goes back to doing the self-timers, having the clothes for the environment you're going into. Normally, not only is yellow a good color, a lighter red is great, so is a sky blue or even a pale blue. But when you think about a sky blue or pale blue in this picture, it wouldn't work. Yellow was perfect. With the ruins, upper right, going back to the Acropolis where Tricia was at. I'm using a neutral density filter, 13 seconds, and I'm standing there, oh, I bet for 30, 40 minutes for the crowd to move in and out. That's the upper right. Similar to lower left, this goes back to 2012, actually. I'm in the Blue Mosque in Turkey, Istanbul. And lower right in 2019, I believe, Angkor Wat, the Bayon in Cambodia, 0.6. You can see the difference in movement with the people. The one woman upper left is slightly moving. The woman in the middle of the picture with the dress on, she's taking a picture while other people are moving around her. And you're getting this flurry of motion, certainly at the Acropolis. The one problem with the Acropolis, upper right-hand corner, is that two people were sitting facing me and they weren't moving. Thus, then I start thinking about model releases, and I don't want to do model releases. It takes, for me, it takes the fun out of the photography. I've shot different cultures, different men and women in their traditional dress, that sort of thing. But I like to have the backside. I'm in with Getty and they want model releases. Do I want to go up to people who can't even speak English and say, would you sign here? No, I really don't want to do that. So it's good if you can get the backside, even with rodeos, trying not to get the face. When it comes to waterfalls, and I was just recently at this particular area, actually last Sunday, there's too much water right now to show the rocks. And again, I'm showing a black and white because if you've got a lot of contrast, experiment with black and white. You can get two pictures in one shot, basically. Cloudy skies or in the shade is best. Also on flowers, and certainly if you're doing any kind of portraits outside, you don't want sun because people are squinting. They're showing wrinkles in their face. With flowers, you're getting shadowing. With water, you're getting hot spots. In the forest, if it's misting out and it's overcast, that's the best time. Then you get to see the bark in the veins and the leaves, all that comes out a little bit more. The ND filters I use, the brand name is Breakthrough. They are expensive. I'm on an 82 millimeter. And that 15 stop costs about $250. They don't have, there is no color shift with a long exposure. And that means that if you're on a minute, 2 minutes, even more than that, you might get a yellow tinge or even a magenta tinge. I know I tried a Hoya one time and it was all magenta. So I watched a few videos on what some of the best neutral density filters are. I came up with Breakthrough. So I have the 6 stop. And when I was shooting this area on Sunday, I was using a 6 stop. It was overcast, as well as my circular polarizer for long exposure, which gave me about 6 seconds, anywhere between 2.5 and 6 seconds. Windmills. Well, these are like, they're just out there. What do you do with windmills? And I've been to a few different windmills. I know in California, there's quite a few. And the wind was howling and I sat there in the car thinking, how can I photograph artistically? Because I wanted to do a story. I proposed a story to a couple of magazines, local, they weren't interested. But at any rate, I thought, slow shutter speed. Now, if you go too slow, there are no windmills. There are only these metal statues. So you've got to figure this out. This is at sunset, so you can see what my speed is, 1/8. And with black and white, I'm getting the clouds coming in this kind of a setting. Black and white is quite effective, actually. Because it's a very stark scene. So the next short music video is this simple subject, windmills. Now, what I want you to watch, this goes rather fast. It's only a minute long again. Is to watch for my camera movement, because now we're going to get into the ICMs, intentional camera movements, and fracturing, what I call fracturing or lens twisting. Note at the last maybe 15 seconds, last 4 or 5 images, the light and shadow effects on the grasses, because when I shot the windmills, this was these particular ones in this segment of the 1 minute, there was clouds. So you're getting the light and shadow back and forth on the rolling hills. Here we go again. So the music might get you excited about going out shooting the windmills, which is a rather static subject, but you can make them somewhat artistic. The moving into panning, think about your ingredients that you need for panning. Slow shutter, subject speed, now the handheld camera speed. If you go too fast, it could become abstract. There's nothing there. What happened to all those cars? I personally like it when the animal is somewhat defined and you get those ghost-like feet. This is Argentina. And of course, one of the major things in Argentina is polo, which I went to a polo match. And so I had 2 or 3 hours of work, being able to work with, the movement of the horses, the riders, etc. We also have actually around the world, polo cross. So when you look at the lower left, you're going to see that it's a combination of the lacrosse, I'm going to say racket, but I don't think that's quite the word, basket, where they catch a ball that's about the size of a grapefruit. It's a rubber ball, it bounces. And the rules are a little bit different, but very exciting. And lower right shows polo cross in a panning motion. I know you have polo there, and the upper right, experiment with your slow shutter speed. But if you wanted to continue, also can challenge yourself with tack sharp as they're striking the ball. That's not easy. So the polo, I went to not only Argentina, but down in Sheridan, Wyoming, where they have a polo club. Take advantage of that polo right there in Santa Rosa. This goes back, slow shutter speed goes back to, I'm just guessing 1998, the 2 cheetahs. And the light was perfect. They're not running, they're either walking or they may be trotting. And I'm out in the bush for 2 to 3 weeks at a time. I don't know what I'm getting. This is one of my favorite shots on film where, yes, I experimented with panning. And working with publishers, they don't see the artistic, I don't think a lot of times they don't see the artistic value unless you're doing your own book or the art of nature, let's say, something like that. Do they see that the blurred movement is what they're looking for on a calendar, let's say? Therefore, when I do it minimally and then go back to the tack sharp. This picture you saw previously in one of the movies. It's one of my favorites. I'm in my kayak floating down the Missouri River. I'm hand holding from the kayak, and I'm set at shutter 1/80th, as you can see. So I'm getting a distinct body with the flutter of the wings and a blurred motion. What I like about this picture is that it's in the fall, in September. The background reds are just beautiful. If they were in greens, the birds wouldn't show up quite as much. The question here is who's moving faster, the bull or the cows? So again, this is up in the Elk Rut, about 3.5 hours north of where I live. And he's on an approach. He's standing somewhat still, but because I'm panning, I'm getting him somewhat blurred, but the cows are moving faster than him. So they're even more blurred than him. And again, this is very experimental. I'm looking at my pictures. I carry a loop. I'm looking close. I'm like, nope, delete, delete, delete. Okay, some more action. Then I start shooting and fiddling with the f-stop, the shutter speed. Intentional camera movement seems to be the trend now. ICM, it's interesting to me that we just might call that slow shutter. All these names that are cropped up, I don't know, social media or in the news somehow. So the ICM, other than panning. Now, this is not doing either, but something I want to note to you. Again, this shows my interest in being diverse. And with teaching, having to expand, I like to think of it as my eye or my mind moving from telephoto to wide angle, meaning that I'm seeing more and different things. And this is a warehouse. This was at an art exhibit a couple summers ago. And the sculptor drilled holes in the ceiling and on the sides. And I call it my light dot room. And the dots are circular at the bottom, but they're a little bit streaked at the top and on the sides. And the only thing I can think of is I'm not moving. It's absolutely dark in there. I have a class in there, and we're all using our headlamps and then shutting them off. That it's because the earth is turning and you're getting these slight streaks. Also notice the colors. Now, the day before I went in to kind of do my research and see what the setup was, it was overcast. There's maybe as many as 5 dots on the floor. And I'm like, okay, this doesn't look real spectacular. And hopefully tomorrow it's sunny. And it was. So the blue is from the blue sky. The yellow is from the color of the metal. I'm on 1.3 seconds. Now take a look. When I'm panning, what's happening here? The person was in the doorway, and you can see even the doorway is stretched. Don't forget to move like diagonally. We get into this mindset of moving horizontally. Well, now don't forget your diagonal. Groups of people were coming in. So I started experimenting with a vertical. Again, I'm set up on a tripod. That's lower left. And then circular movement. This reminds me of coiled wire. 1 second exposure. And this was a little bit more recent, maybe 6 to 8 weeks ago. We were getting snow and then it was raining. It couldn't make up its mind. The weather is pretty fickle up here. And so I went to one of our parks to shoot the trees, and I got these little dancing comets by moving the ICM. Now, any questions concerning slow shutter without camera movement, like my Quailias, the South African wedding, and slow shutter with camera movement? Next is fracturing. Any questions?
Well, you mentioned that you delete in the camera. Is that right?
I do.
Oh, okay, because I heard once that you shouldn't do that, but I always want to.
You know, if the picture looks to my eye bad, like it's, if I'm shooting tack sharp and I can see my bear or whatever it is not sharp, I'm getting rid of it to clean out my card.
Mhm.
And you have to be careful because I've gone so fast with deleting that I've deleted something that I really shouldn't have deleted. And then I'm kicking myself.
Uh-oh.
But I've always heard that as well. But if I only have a 16 gigabyte or megabyte card, and I know the picture's overexposed, or it's just not, it's not a good picture. I really want to save time with the editing and downloading. That's what it comes to.
Mhm.
So that's my personal, I've heard the same for ever since digital's come out. And I do it when I know that my picture, I feel my picture really isn't worth anything, that it's a definite blur and it's not an intentional camera movement.
I've always heard that it degrades the card.
Oh,
Yes, I've heard that too.
And so the idea is to just delete them when you get them, you know, when you upload them, rather than
Okay.
doing it from the card itself.
okay. Well, I haven't heard that. And, you know, early on I used Lexar, and I've had 3 or 4 Lexars go down on me, including on an important trip and leaving right before a trip. So I'm not in favor of Lexar cards because I've had bad experience with about 3 of them.
Mhm.
Otherwise, now I stick to Delkin. I think Delkin's great.
Is that DELCAN?
Yeah, D as in
K-I-N.
dog,
Oh,
ELKIN. When I was on the, Sigma hired me as a rep from 2008 to 2010. And I did lectures in Del Mar, California. And I met the people there and they were very professional and great. And I just like the few products that I have of them, of theirs, from their card reader to their cards. And so I try to stick with Delkin. That's my personal take on that. And because of the bad experience with about 3 or 4 Lexars, I don't know what happened, but they wouldn't come up and yeah.
Okay.
I had a question about your the photo where you did the horizontal movement with the person in the doorway. How come the person in the doorway wasn't blurry?
He's slightly shadowed, but okay, so if I have enough time, let's say it's a second, I don't move as I release the shutter. I call it sitting on my subject and then moving.
Okay.
So, and that's especially going to come in this next part with fracturing or twisting. Now, if you're on 1/8 of a second or 1/13, I'm not standing there chatting with someone because I'm thinking about the process between my index finger, the shutter, that which is the shutter release, and and how fast do I want to move the camera? If I go too fast, I'm getting nothing, and that for me is a delete on the camera. If I'm getting a slight blur or like almost like a double exposure, that's what I'm envisioning that I'm wanting. And I think that's something to remember if you don't have a whole lot of time, such as 1/13, 1/8. Think about you're probably going to have to move as you release, or it's a millisecond. If I've got 1 second, 3 seconds or something, that's a lot of time. And you're going to see that coming up here in the next few minutes.
Right.
Hope that answers. Yeah. You ready for this next part? Okay. Fracturing or twisting the lens is next. It calls for a slower shutter speed, turning a zoom lens. How much fracture depends on the shutter speed and how fast the lens is turned. So you might turn it slow, maybe a few streaks. So then you think, okay, I'm going to do it again, but I'm going to turn a little bit faster. And maybe gradually you get what you want, or gradually goes off the charts again. So this is just a net that's set up with at the driving range on a golf course. And this was done in color, and it was in hoarfrost, actually. You can see the hoarfrost on the right side. And then I changed it into black and white. I just thought it was a little more impactful. So upper left, we're back at Grand Prismatic Pool, the one I flew over, which again is down at the lower left. This was in October and was actually on a kind of a cloudy sky. So they weren't really seeing the vibrant colors of the bacteria map, but the wind was howling. I'm about 300 to 400 yards away across the road. I stopped. It was an ugly day because of all the wind. I'm at 1.3 seconds F20 with that 1 to 400 on a tripod, no ICM, but note the steam. So the steam is billowing up, but because it's on 1.3 seconds, the wind is taking it, giving it a little more wispy look. Lower right is fractured. Now, again, 0.8 of a second, F10. My focal length is 188 on the 1 to 400. That's as far as I got. And I usually start out at 100 or 400 and turn it in. And I think the reason being it's easier on the wrist to do that than to start in close with your zoom and then to zoom out. If that question or
That makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah, it just seems to be easier to handle. Now it depends on how much fraction. Now 0.8 of a second. So you can see my figures have become elongated. If they're moving, some are standing still, such as in the upper left. So the people standing still, they're fairly sharp, while the ghost figures are actually moving, and they look like they're more ghostly in the fractured picture lower right. Back to our Lightroom. I have 5 seconds. Boy, I could take a snooze here. That's quite a bit of time. And you see where my starting point is, because I knew that question was going to come up, like, why aren't they blurred, or why isn't, I'm using a crystal ball here and I've got a rope netting around it. It's, I think, sitting on the floor or on this little glass stand. So 5 seconds, again, it's dark and I'm just playing around with this and it looks like a galaxy. So my crystal ball has suddenly come at you. And when I looked at this, eventually I put down, here's my starting point. So with that much time, I'm sitting on the crystal ball and now I'm twisting. Depending on how fast I twist is going to affect the flare of the light dots. I would love to go back into this warehouse. It's closed up right now and may not be used again. People coming in, remember the colors are from the sky and the sides of the warehouse, 0.8 seconds. That's still quite a bit of time. Just to show you the difference here, the slow shutter with subjects moving into my subject on the right-hand side. This is 1896. I'm not quite that old, but that's when the first Olympics occurred. So while I was in Greece, I went to the original stadium, which is actually behind me. This tunnel led to a museum, and which was fascinating because it showed all the old Olympic posters and some of the news articles. So I just stood there for quite a while waiting for people to pass through. So the walls are tack sharp. So this is where my subject is moving into my view. The lower left is Alcatraz, moving through and fracturing my lens through one of the tunnels at Alcatraz. Going back to Cambodia, here's Angkor Wat, and the largest temple, I believe, in the world, actually, and still being used. I shot this just normal, 70 to 200 on a tripod. I got tired of shooting that. I'm at a distance because I'm approaching. I thought, let's just try a fracture here. And you can see I'm on 1/5. So I'm having to synchronize between my index finger and twisting because I don't have a whole lot of time to think. That thinking comes again before the shot. Upper left, Hanoi. You can see she's selling her flowers. Now note the speed, 1/5 f20. Same speed, lower left. With my words, but the lower right-hand corner, 1/5 f20. I'm turning the lens faster. Now it looks like she's selling brooms and you hardly can see her. And you can see the amount of flare that's coming out from the twist. Hanoi streets, it's always chaotic. A lot of little motorbikes. And again, 1/8, that's the upper left, bottom right, 1/5. So I have less, I have a little more time, not much, but it's just enough to give more of a flare. It's not as squiggly as the upper left when it comes to the flare. One of my favorite pictures, look, I don't have much time to think about this, 1/10. I'm sure I just synchronized together. I did not envision anything like this. Again, my thought process is 1/10. I've got to turn quick as I release the shutter. So this is the Hanoi Flower Gardens where I was focused in on these 3 women and then this splash of color all around them, altered image. Teepees, this was done in late October on a hill overlooking Bozeman. You can see we had snow on the ground. This was mid-October during the Native American Week. The pictures I saw, all the teepees were lit, such as upper left. I saw a newspaper, Facebook. I'm like, okay, I got to do something different. And so I went back a couple times at night and 2 or 3 times at sunrise and decided to twist the lens. And that's what happened with the lower right-hand corner. And working with people within the photo, they tend to extend rather than become elongated rather than blurry. And 1.6 seconds, I can sit on them and then twist. This was the end of March with our powwow in the field house. The part of the problem I'm sitting on the floor is you get the audience in the background. So 1/13, upper left-hand corner, 1/8, you can see the audience is fractured in a different manner. And the person dancing has a lot more regalia with the feathers. And on the upper left, I probably wouldn't show this other than in a lecture because the child is identifiable. Also, I went back, I think 2 more times. And when I have allowed myself to stay in one area, now it's easy because I live right here, is that when I'm editing, I'm like, okay, you got to take the back side because their numbers are on the front of them. And it just, I think, interferes with the picture and all their feathers and beadwork, etc. Okay, it's almost time to sign off. Any questions on the movement or panning?
Do you ever use the auto ISO and auto white balance?
Not the auto ISO. I want to be in control. I don't
Mhm.
want the camera to control me. So auto ISO, when it's a little bit dark, might go up to 4,000th of a ISO, or, you know, where that's going to start getting noisy. So I want to control that. When it comes to white balance, I know in the beginning, oh, just use AWB all the time and then work the computer. I don't like doing that. If it's sunny out, I usually go into my Kelvin scale. My Kelvin scale on Canon, daylight or sunny is 5200. Nikon, it's a little bit different. I'm not sure what it is on Sony or Fuji.
Okay. Yeah.
As the sun gets higher up, everything becomes more harsh. So if you're in the desert, let's say Utah with the red rocks, I want to warm those rocks up. So I shoot at K 54 to 5600. And those rocks are a little bit more vivid with the redness. When it comes to the golden light saturated, while you're thinking it might be a sunny icon, I have learned that when I shot Bill, the golden retriever, if I was shooting at 5200, he came out almost orange. Because as the sun gets lower, everything becomes more saturated. The grasses become saturated. He became orange. So I reduced my Kelvin scale to about 4800. I've just learned that my own way. AWB, I find, gives you muted colors. And now, if you haven't touched those photos, or if you haven't been in nature a lot, you're guessing at the color of the grasses, maybe the color of the horses. And I find that color, when I look at a lot of calendars, let's say, I find that the color of the Grand Canyon, where some of my pictures appear, those colors aren't correct. Or trying to, it's a cloudy day and you want the colors to pop. I know when digital first came in working with publishers, at first, the two things, over sharpening and over saturation, was a big issue. And I think, you know, those publishers have since retired. You have a new generation, and it's just like the film. Velvia film came in, everything was vibrant. I did not use Velvia film on my wildlife when I was in Africa. I used Provia or Sensia, because the colors were more natural. And when I did experiment on cheetahs with Velvia, my cheetah came out like a mustard yellow. Not the color of the cheetah. It's a pale yellow, more like Provia or even Sensia. And Sensia was less expensive. So that's my thoughts on AWB, auto white balance, except there are exceptions. In fog, not in cloudy, because then you're in a kind of a yellow tinge. And if you go into shade, it's even more yellow. If you have this problem with a color cast, and in fog that will happen, could happen in smoke, in a snow blizzard, the same thing. Then in my editing, I go under my enhancing. If it's Photoshop, it's under adjustments, Lightroom, I can't remember what it's under, but it's color cast, remove color cast.
Oh.
I use Elements. I've started with Elements, and Elements works just great for me. And you have a dropper, and it says whatever you want to be white, gray, or black, put the dropper there. So in a snow blizzard, I put it on that white, and that gray becomes white, actually. It's very simple in Elements, in Photoshop, actually. So that's that.
Cool.
Any other questions? I'm going to show this. This is again about a minute. I'm going to sign off and leave you with one last travel around the world. But this is the artistry of shutter speed, all consolidated within a minute, from tack sharp to movement. Music is through royalty-free Con 5 music, and I've noticed Con 5 music is used. I was watching TV one night, and I'm like, that's Con 5 music. I just can't recognize it. So you can buy 45 seconds, 15 seconds for an ad, 6 minutes, 10, 20 minutes, whatever. For about 45 seconds, some might cost $15, others might cost a lot more than that. Someone, the pro photographers in South Africa put me on to Con 5 music rather than using Sarah Brightman or Andrea Bocelli, which I've done with about 100 music videos. Questions?
Great.
Oh,
Yeah.
the sound was a little
Really
different
great.
at the end.
Excuse me?
Could everybody hear that last video?
I
Did you
did.
see that?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay, good. Maybe it was just this connection here.
Yeah, my connection's a little in and out, but
Yeah, it was in and out here. Yeah.
quite amazing. Thank you, Carol.
Yeah,
Really. Oh,
fabulous.
you're
Yeah,
welcome.
Really good.
I appreciate doing this for you. And if there are other questions, that's great. Otherwise, I have one final, it's maybe 2 minutes in length, just taking you around the world.
All right.
And,
Oh, nice.
any pictures of me in there are all self-timers. And like I said, self-timers are difficult.
Yeah.
How do you want to appear? And so you're going to see some of this. So it's going to go around the world from, I don't know, Turkey to wherever else. And so I'll start that right now.
Okay, cool.
This is going to start in Death Valley. So let me know, you notice my foot. Think about the bison. Same concept, you see. Now, if I'm walking across a broadside, the foot that I want up is the one that's closest to the camera. So if I'm turning to the left here, I would be using my right foot and trying to capture that as I'm walking and not striking, because when you strike, your leg or the animal's leg is straight and it looks static. So this is working with motion. I'm wearing what's called a kikoi, which is out of Southern Africa, something to give. I'm rather bright looking out there in the dunes. And really, after I'm done photographing, the last thing I want to do is do a self-timer. And it's only because I have a chance to send something to a travel or clothing, well, in this case, a travel catalog. So this opens up with Death Valley. And that's it.
Wonderful work. Thank you
Nice.
so much. Thank you so much.
Oh,
Wonderful.
thank you
Wow,
for staying
thanks,
awake
Carol.
and
Thanks for spending the time.
staying with me. And again, thank you to Linda and the program committee for having me.
Yeah.
Pleasure. Really
Yeah.
excellent presentation. Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you
Thanks for
very much.
coming.
Makes
Yeah.
me want to be more patient.
Well, you know, I call it the 3 Ps. So when a person becomes interested in the subject, a passion is created. Then you persevere with patience. And those 3 go together. And I think I have more patience really with animals and observing, probably than with people. But, you know, in my travels, and I think of when I was in Turkey, and I was there for a month in 2012. And one of my students was from Turkey. And when I started coming to Africa, I wondered, how am I going to, where am I going to go next? Well, my students were from Turkey, then another one from Argentina, and they said, hey, go to Turkey. And I thought, Ephesus, ancient ruins. But being on my own, it gives me a chance to sit down if I'm a little bit tired. And I was in a park and I was just watching people. And this is something, when you have downtime and you're in, let's say, a city, at that time I was in Istanbul, watching, and you get into cultural nuances. And one of the nuances I noticed, there was a young woman sitting across the path from me, and she was busy on her cell phone. And the 1 or 2 women that walked by were in their, the Muslim headgear and long skirts and whatnot. The young girl on the cell phone didn't even pay any attention. Now, Istanbul's pretty modern and contemporary. So next small group of women that walked by were in the tights and the form-fitting, and she looked. And, you know, just the cultural nuances and picking up on different things. And when you have enough time while you're drinking your coffee or whatever, it's interesting to just watch. The same thing with animals, observing behaviors. That's what it comes down to.
Yeah.
So I think that's a lot of what I got is the patience part, the need to observe,
And wait for it.
wait for it, do your research ahead of time.
Yeah. Understand behaviors.
Yeah, that's
And that's good
wisdom.
because, yeah, you've got the nests right there, and you've got Bodega Bay, and you've got, gosh, you've got access to so many
Oh,
things.
boy.
So do you, my gosh, in Bozeman.
I know.
Yellowstone. Whew.
Yeah. That's true. And because there's so much, again, I go in thinking, all right, I need to just work on geysers or bacteria mats, no animals. But when I'm driving, I have my big lenses on and I'm ready for any kind of action en route. And just 3 or 4 years ago, there's a golden eagle right in the middle of the tar road, pecking on a dead little something or other. I drove by, suddenly slammed on the brakes. I'm like, man, there's a golden eagle. And traffic are moving on the opposite side. I'm like, okay, just flip around. And no one's behind me. I'm always looking behind me and using my rear views, the outside mirrors, because when someone's tailgating me, I have to pull over and let them go. Otherwise, you're pressured. You're pressured to get going, and you don't want that. And by golly, I stopped. I'm just, I don't know, closer than 5 yards from this eagle. What I didn't do, I was in tracking. And when you're in tracking, your lens is searching because you need movement. The bird looked at me. I'm cursing at my system because I didn't set it on one shot. I quickly pulled it away and got into one shot, and I actually got one shot, and he's got feathers or something in his mouth. He looked at me. I'm just getting a headshot because I'm using a 500, and then he flew away. And that, there's always these different things. You're shooting night photography or you're on long shutter speed. You forget to reset your camera for the next day.
Your tripod. Take off of.
Yeah, everything.
okay. Yeah,
You're
lots to keep
tripping
up.
over. Yeah, when you're out there, I dropped a neutral density filter in the snow. It was about 10 degrees several years ago, trying to get sunrise on a sprinkler system that's just sitting out there in a field of snow. And I was in a rush and I dropped it in the snow.
Mm.
Well, you think you could brush it off? No, it crystallized immediately. I went into the car and I turned on the heater and the sun's coming off and I'm losing it all. And by then, that's, again, you're racing against the light and all these crazy things come up. That's one reason why I have my students write their process, right down to the funny things, or they tripped into a bush because they were following a butterfly and they didn't watch where they were going, anything like that, because it's
Tripped over barbed wire.
yeah, exactly.
Face plant in the,
Somebody
crap.
perhaps did that.
Oh.
Somebody perhaps did that.
Just
Oh, yeah.
Ouch.
Yeah.
So, well, good luck to all of you. I know it's getting later there than here. And again, I thank you for being such a great audience.
Thank
Yeah.
you for
Great.
being
So
here.
much for sharing your fun
Okay.
things. And
Thanks
thanks,
very
Bill, for helping us through this.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bill's already like the solo.
Well, keep experimenting. Keep trying to think outside the box.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Get a shot that's not the same as everybody around you.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Okay,
Okay.
good
All
night.
right. Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Night, everybody.
Night.